Police Minister Bheki Cele has revealed that there is a staff shortage at 10,111 call centres. He was responding to a parliamentary question by DA spokesperson for policing Andrew Whitfield on complaints about a high number of dropped calls. South African Police Union spokesperson Lesiba Thobakgale joins us for more on this. Mushabi, good evening.
Gwena, evening to yourself and to your viewers back at home.
Thank you so much for coming through. And maybe as a way into this conversation, when the minister talks about dropped calls, what does he mean?
When the minister is referring to the dropped calls, it means those are calls that stood for a long time on the list because it is referring to call centers where call center agents are responding to calls, emergency calls, which comes through our 10,000 center, whereby those who are working there, our members that are working there, are meant to receive those calls. So if it is dropped calls, definitely it means that whoever was calling was waiting for a long time to an extent whereby they could not wait anymore. They had to drop that call because it was not being answered, clearly because of the long queue of calls that members would be experiencing, a high volume of calls within the 10,111 centers.
How common is this issue of dropped calls?
When we look, Gwena, at our 10,111 centers within the South African Police Services, the issue of capacity that we have in the South African Police Services, it also affects 10,111 call centers. Because clearly we've got members that are working there whom over the years they've been translated to be under the Police Act, meaning that we've got police officers who are working under those centers. And clearly the issue of the lack of capacity that we have, we see in the police stations, the lack of capacity that we see in the police units, the lack of capacity that we see in the overall South African Police Services, it also affects our 10,111 centers. So the issue of dropped calls, clearly it comes where the lack of capacity is also there. We've seen under that parliamentary answer that the minister has given that all of the 10,111 centers, call centers, are clearly understaffed. So the issue of capacity, it is a problem. It is only the Northern Cape that it is not so understaffed. But when you look at most of the big provinces, or majority of the provinces, they are clearly not having enough capacity to deal with a high volume of calls that are coming in, because that is informed by the fact that there is not enough members to really take those calls and be able to dispatch complaints to the patrol vans. If that complaint, it is something that is in progress, it is something that has already occurred, there is a van that needs to go and attend to it. So that capacity really that we have in the subs, it is also affecting 10,111 centers.
Is it a general question of understaffing at the South African Police, as you say, that affects all departments? I mean, is this something that has always been there? And if so, what are the solutions to a problem that looks like has been there for a while of understaffing, as you said, it's not only at 10,111, but at other areas of policing in South Africa?
If you remember correctly, Gwena, we have been on record as SAPU where we're mentioning the issue of the lack of the human capital within the South African Police Services. We have been on record about that, and we even brought the issues of solutions to say SAPs needs to be capacitated. When we compared to it from around 2009, just before around the World Cup, we had at least above 190,000. But when we look at the numbers now, they have since went down. So solutions to that, it is capacitating subs through human capital, meaning that recruitment drives, they need to be taken, and even the high volume of trainees that goes to college, it needs to come up. We've got even some of our reservists, whom some of them, they happen to be interested to become police officers, to become permanent, in order to also have them into those programs. We have seen that around December, there were at least around 10,000 trainees who finished their training, and then they are out there in the police stations and also to try and assist in the issue of capacity. But we need from our view as SAP, we need at least 30,000 more in order to deal with the lack of capacity challenge that the South African Police Services has. Imagine where there is a robbery in progress, or maybe it is a housebreaking in progress, and one cannot be able to reach a call center, clearly because of the high volume of calls. And no one can blame it on the members themselves there, because with the limited numbers that they have, we know that they are doing their best. But it is about time whereby government and management need to take the center stage here and address the issue of capacity within the South African Police Services. If this year and the coming 2 years, we can continue with the 10,000 that we were able to do the past year, SAPS indeed would be able to come up to the higher level where we are dealing with the issue of the lack of capacity that South African Police Services is having. That is a solution that is needed to capacitate South African Police Services in order to ensure that when it comes to the call centers, when it comes to crime prevention, when it comes to the community service centers, there is enough capacity. When it comes to the issue of detectives, when we look at crime detection, where we could have enough capacity to deal with the issue of the high levels of crime that we have in this country.
Lesiba, just out of curiosity, what causes this shortage? I mean, understandably, we are going to see another 10,000 retirements and resignations, or at least from last year. But what is the source of this shortage of police? Are people no longer interested in policing? Or what could be the problem? Why there are no longer as many police as we used to have, as you mentioned, like 5 years ago?
Remember, there's what we call natural attrition that always comes. There will be those who would, they reach their retirement age. Some, they would resign looking for greener pastures. Some indeed, would say, you know what, I don't want to be in the SAPS anymore. They've got other better things that they want to do. And on top of that, we also have those whom you find that when we look at the filling of those vacant posts, when others leave, we've got a challenge whereby filling of vacant posts, we still have that standing agenda item in the PSCBC, where government does not have the intention to fill vacant and funded posts. That post ended up sitting there for a period of a year. And after a year where that post is not filled, the GPSA, they withdraw funding when it comes to that funded and vacant post. And then that causes a whole lot of problems. So this issue of not filling vacant posts, government and SAPS management, they also have to take responsibility when it comes to it, because we've seen the austerity measures that have been implemented by government. Austerity is also part that is really playing a role into this issue that we are having. If all vacant posts were filled within the South African Police Services, then they would be able, at least the issue of capacity, it would not be where it is now as we are looking at it. So we need to deal with the issue of filling funded and vacant posts as and when they come, when others are leaving. We need to deal with the issue of frustrations that some members happen to have within the SAPS, where you find that some are being victimized by their commanders. They end up saying, I do not want to be in the SAPS anymore. I will see wherever I can go. Some, they even choose to take early retirement because they do not want to be in the SAPS anymore because of the frustrations that some senior managers are giving to members. Those are the realities that we have on the ground. So if indeed the issue of management can be about the issue of the job, can it clearly be about making sure that they take care of the members? Because if you have a happy member within your working environment, that happy member would not wish to resign. If one is not victimized, would not say, I'm leaving the South African Police Service. So some of those frustrations, they clearly play a role in where others happen to leave the organization, whereas they are skilled at that time, whereas indeed there is a lot that they were doing to the organization and they can still be able to do to the organization. But recruitment, where we've got a whole lot of the youth whom they are interested in joining the South African Police Services, that is something that they need to continue with vigorously, as they've done with the previous 10,000 in the year 2022, and that will indeed take us back to where the South African Police Services used to be prior to 2010.
But Lesiba, if you talk about 10,000, which I guess it's a great number, but if we're saying there's 10,000 recruits in 2022, and every year 6,000 retirements, the numbers will not balance if that is the case. It means we will always have a shortfall.
That is why in some of these challenges that we have outlined, Kwena, clearly, we are saying we need to deal with how managers are really dealing with the human capital, are really dealing with the members, are really treating their employees, they are really treating their subordinates. There's a whole lot of personal vendettas that are also existing, amongst the ranks and so on. If everyone could be and focus on ensuring that the constitutional mandate of the South African Police Services, it is the one that comes first, not any personal vendettas, not targeting anyone, but only focusing on ensuring that the country and its inhabitants are safe, then the issue of some of these retirements, some of these resignations that we are seeing would really be evaded. We really need to deal with all of those issues. And everything, it lays on the hands of management, the type of management style that they have in place. Some of them, you find that they are really not managers. So we need to deal with all of those issues so that members do not find themselves frustrated in order for them to retain members. Because the retention of members who are experienced, it is very important. Because it does not help, as you have alluded, to the issue of bringing the 10,000, whereas you have numbers around 6,000 a year who will leave the system. At least let us have those whom indeed they have reached their retirement age, but not because of some are looking at greener pastures. The issues of salaries, the issues of benefits, they need to be improved. We keep on now, we still have the service allowance, or what we call a danger allowance, that is still standing at 400 rand. When we were negotiating around December with the employer, dealing with such issues, which indeed are affecting our members, when we look at the higher cost of living that we have, when we look repo rate, which has just been increased 3 times this year, employer only just came with a 100 rand increase, whereas that remained for over 20 years being 400 in terms of the issue of the danger allowance or the service allowance. We were just saying, employer, at least increase it to 1,600. So some of those issues, Kwena, they really have an impact in how members happen to find themselves being happy in the workspace. Some of them, they end up being frustrated and they leave the service.
Lesiba, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're basically saying that there's a lot of unhappiness within South African police services, and that's why we're seeing so many people leaving, and that's why the numbers are not balancing. Am I hearing you right?
That also contributes. Imagine an organization like the South African Police Services not having a promotion policy as well, only relying on a national instruction. National instruction, which on its own, it is just giving guidance. It just guides one. They are not bound to it. So the issue of members having to wait for around 11 to 12 years, we are referring to those who are at the lower levels, from constable to warrant officers. You have to wait for 11 years to be promoted to the next rank. Those are some of the issues that we are continuing to fight, and we're not finding one another in order to ensure that we've got upward mobility of our members in order for them to be happy. If you have happy employees, they will be productive. You will be able to retain them within the within the service, like a security cluster in this regard within the South African Police Services, which plays a very critical role within our country, because for the community to grow, you need safety. You need to ensure that security and safety are guaranteed.
Thobakgale, thank you very much for coming through.